Welcome to this edition of Inside the Cafeteria.
Today's conversation will be about Stephen Frear's Philomena. Philomena was adapted by Steve Coogan and Jeff Pope from the Martin Sixsmith novel. It's a story that begins with a particularly chance meeting between a political journalist, Martin Sixsmith, played by Steve Coogan, and a woman who tells the story of her mother, Philomena Lee, played by Judi Dench. The story is of how, as a child in a convent, her son was taken away from her against her will. What follows is a film that takes us on a journey with these two characters in their attempt to find the truth about the son's life and the decisions and the consequences that still happen to this day. I'm going to bring in my co-host now. I think what I like to start with is Martin Sixsmith. He's someone who's very apprehensive on taking the story of Philomena Lee, but in the end of the film, he's the most, I guess, angry at the decisions that this convent does take. So can you kind of rationalize why he would be, so hesitant initially, but then so passionate at the end?
Well, I think because the story changes to something that interests him, for lack of a better term. It's at first it seems like, it's a mother trying to reunite with her son. He's pretty clear being that's human interest. He's not really interested in human interest. But by the end, you see that this was like politically motivated and institutionalized wrongdoing by this abbey. So what really got to him is not just Philomena was wrong, that all these women are wronged in his eyes.
Okay, that brings up a good point. So do you think, the film's message is supposedly an attack on the Catholic way, or is it trying to explain to many of the audience why and how these decisions were made in the past? Where do you fall? Is it an attack, or is it kind of a justification on what was obviously a wrong thing, but something that obviously happened is something that needs to be explained?
Yeah, I think the Philomena character brings out a lot of the reasons why this movie is not just a straight up attack. First reason is that she was abandoned by her family, and the Catholic Church, this abbey, was going to be the only place that would take in a young person like herself with a baby. So I think in her own weird way, she is grateful for that, even though they did take her baby away from her later. It did give her a chance to still live.
Gave her a chance to have an actual son, right?
Yeah.
But I think, as you go on through the plot, you learn that it's less of an attack on the Catholic way, but that, these things happened, and obviously now it's a great story to tell the story of these wrongdoings, but also to kind of explain why these happened and why the time sort of dictated it.
Yeah, I mean, Ireland in the 1950s was a very, very poor country. Let's not forget that. I mean, there's a reason why Americans came to the Ireland to adopt babies, because Irish people there were not able to take on another child.
Absolutely. Anything else?
Well, this movie is based on a true story, and it's actually a lot of movies based on a true story nominated for Best Picture this year. This movie, it pretty much follows what happened in real life. The only big scene where they took dramatic license was where Sister Hildegard, who was the head of the abbey, so to speak, is still alive when they meet her in about 2004, 2005, versus in reality where she died in 1995. So do you think the addition of this scene added to this movie what the point they were trying to get across, or do you think it was a little bit unnecessary to deviate from history like that?
I think it added. It's... as like we said, it's not a movie that we get necessarily being angry at the Catholic Church, and it's more of a trying to explain it, and having Sister Hildegard at the end trying to explain that I did it because I felt that your child rearing was a sin. And it also provided a character that, Martin could really feel angry about. Because I think as much as this is an exploration of Philomena Lee, it's an exploration of Martin Sixsmith in his discovery of this. So he needs something to kind of lash out against at the end. And if Hildegard wasn't there, you'd miss that opportunity, and we'd miss the opportunity of seeing how Sixsmith is so mad, but Philomena is so forgiving, and that contrast and how, those two things come together.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think what I took out of this movie is that you can't, like, it's not necessarily the Catholic Church as a whole was wrong. It's that how people interpreted what to do was wrong. It's such as Sister Hildegard. It was obviously a different time. I mean, not excusing that, but it was views in the past about single motherhood were very different.
Absolutely. Let's move on to those individuals receiving Academy recognition, and we have to start with Judi Dench, who once again is nominated for a leading female actor in a leading role. But in this case, her Philomena Lee is a bubbly, effervescent character, something you would not expect for a woman who's gone through so much pain and so much hell after these 50 years. So it's definitely a change of sorts for Judi Dench, who's normally known for more serious candor. How do you find Judi Dench in this more bubbly, effervescent, somebody who's, really seeks the positives in life? And how do you think she did in this role?
I think Martin Sixsmith sums that very well with one line. Philomena is the product of a lifetime of Reader's Digest, daytime soaps, and the Daily Mail. So she's kind of like the mother, grandma everyone has. I think we said the same thing about Nebraska. Philomena Lee is kind of like the same thing. And I also found it interesting that, you had Judi Dench playing this more comedic role, so to speak. It is a very dramatic movie, I know. But then you also had Steve Coogan, who's mainly known for comedic roles, playing the dramatic role. So it was a reversal of roles you'd expect.
And I think it helped both. Like, exactly. I thought Steve Coogan, known for his performances, his comedic writing, has some of the most impactful scenes and some of the most serious scenes. That confrontation with, the convent at the end and just the administration and the elderly sister is gripping stuff. He's angry and he's playing that really well. I was very impressed with what Steve Coogan could do. I expect that out of Judi Dench, but what I did not expect that out of Steve Coogan. So this may end up being the film that he will be known for just because of the success he's had with the screenplay and with the performance. So I think it was a really good job done by Steve Coogan.
Yeah, I agree with that. Steve Coogan definitely brought a lot to the table. I mean, he also wrote the movie too, so I think that also helped know exactly what role he's going to get into. So, and it also gave him a clearer role of his interactions with Philomena.
Now, one of the performances we don't have liked more of a backstory on her son, because her son had a really interesting life himself. Michael, the Republican who worked in the Reagan and H.W. Bush eras. Do you think that performance or that character could have been more fleshed out and given more screen time, or were you just happy reliving that character's life through flashbacks?
Yeah, I did like the flashbacks about that. I think I did mention that some of these were actually flashbacks that were actually real footage, not made for the movie, but actually footage of Michael's younger life, being raised in America. But I'll say I don't really mind not knowing that too much more about Michael, because that's just more of a personal preference. I prefer movies where it's like, one side of the story. In this case, Philomena's story, and you don't know the entire story about Michael's story. I know Michael's story was equally as gripping. I mean, an American who was born in Ireland, looking for a connection to where he's from. So that is equally as gripping. But I think, in a way, it would have made the movie too clouded. I mean, at the core of this movie is a journey to find her son,
right.
And I think having another journey on top of that in a different timeline would have made it too crowded, and it wouldn't have necessarily been Philomena.
But saying that, I wouldn't be against a film or a documentary about Michael's life. I think it'd be interesting indeed. Philomena is a very calm hand helmed directed film, and obviously that's a lot of attributed to Stephen Frears, the veteran British filmmaker, recently most famously known for directing The Queen. Once again, he gives us a lot of tender character moments and a film about discovery, and he's been quite popular with that, or quite successful with that. Any comments about Stephen Frears and how he was able to bring this biography or true story, but still give it, avoid the pitfalls of being too saccharine or too sweet or too raw, Philomena go, raw, Philomena go?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's because doing a character like Philomena is pretty straightforward after you've already stripped down like such a stately character like the Queen and made her human, right? So making a character that's already human and not making her perfect, but not making her too overly flawed, I think was pretty easy for a talented director like Stephen Frears to do that.
I agree. One of the other components of the film receiving Academy recognition is fantastic film composer Alexander Desplat's original score. When I watched the film, and I think this is probably a positive, the score was very subtle. There was no big, instrumentation or big epic revival score moments. So I think with the tone of the film, this is a film of a quirky woman who's gone through a lot of pain. The subdued score worked well, and Alexander Desplat's score helped the film instead of, stood above the film in many senses.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. When I learned this movie was nominated for Best Score, I was like, okay, it didn't have the score that stood out the most, but the score that fit the most. I don't think there'd be a score that you could probably write better for a movie that's at its core is just about two characters on a journey. So pretty much a buddy cop movie to speak.
Exactly. We're nearing the end of this edition of Inside the Academy Studio, and like always, we like to end with questions. So I ask, what was your favorite moment in Philomena?
I think my favorite moment is going to be when Martin receives information that when he finds out that Philomena's son, Tony, which he later learns his name Michael in America, is actually dead. And that little bit is a slow load of the screen. So that 2002 technology really adds to the anticipation. So when he learns and it gets to the bottom of the page, died in 1995, first you see his reaction, then you see Philomena come around the corner, and then her reaction. It was just a great shot that it's going to be hard to replicate today.
Absolutely. That was a very well-crafted scene. I'm going to go with more of a comical moment, and I think it's when Martin and Philomena are en route to Washington initially, and they're sitting in that buggy. And Philomena, once again, grown up on Reader's Digest and daily soaps, is telling Martin, who's not interested at all about this romantic, sudsy novel she's reading, and she goes in such detail and such passion about a story that really has no significance, or really is not a great piece of work, but she's so passionate about it that Martin kind of starts to see why people like Philomena, and that why she's a worthy cause, and why this story can ultimately be worthy. I ask, what was your least favorite moment in Philomena?
I think my least favorite moment would just have to be the chance meeting that was set up between Philomena's daughter and Martin. I think it felt a little too quick, and I would have preferred if there was more time and consideration put into why Martin was initially drawn to Philomena's case.
Okay, I see that. My least favorite moment was when they're in the States and they find out who Michael is, and they find out that they locate his sister, who was also adopted against her will. That was just a weird scene. I thought the sister was, I don't know if she stopped caring, but she showed really no emotion, either positive or negative. You would assume she'd be mad at her mother letting her go, but she was never asked about her mother. She never asked about Ireland. So it seemed really weird that this sister, and then when we find out about Michael was so passionate about Ireland, but his sister never had or never shows any care about it. That's an interesting, thing, and it seemed really, really off to me in the sense of what they were trying to work for. Maybe it happened in real life, but it seemed weird. Last thing we do is word association. So when you think Philomena, what word do you think of?
Abby.
And I think of labor. So when we think of Philomena, we think of Abby and labor. That is this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Thank you.